welcome to Policing TV, and it's great to be joined by Paul Anderson, the former Chief Constable of Humberside Police, and with a distinguished career before that. Paul, part of a key part actually of your joining me on Policing TV here today is that you have some news on the disciplinary process that you have been engaged in with the IOPC. So, for those not familiar with the IOPC, the Independent Office for Police Conduct here in the United Kingdom, would you like to provide, rather than me doing so, some background to that first? And then we'll come on to what has happened in the last very few days. So, first of all, the background, if you would.
Yeah, no, certainly it would be an absolute pleasure. I mean, as you're aware, I served a little over 5 years in Humberside, and I was one of the team that was instrumental in kind of the turnaround of the force and taking it from from the low 30s up to the top performing force in the United Kingdom. That's a team effort all the way, and that goes all the way, and most importantly to the people that actually go out and put the boots on the streets. So I'm immensely proud of that. As I said, I'll reiterate, that was a team effort all the way. However, towards the end of my time, since the summer of 2024, I'd been subject to a malicious complaint and an investigation, which was passed to the IOPC. I made the decision to retire from service. I had over 34 years policing service in, and on that with a pension that had matured 4 years beyond, and then knowing what comes from a process such as an IOPC investigation for the good of the people there, for the good of the force and my own well-being, it seemed a good time to step down and let the force continue to forward its own way. Now, I'm delighted to say from a personal perspective, I've had a letter from the IOPC dated the 13th of October, and the letter states the final determination is no case to answer on all allegations from the investigation, reading directly from the letter, with no further action. And it that I guess concludes quite a difficult 16 months for me, I have to say. Happily talk about that process if you want me to.
Absolutely keen that we share that with Policing TV viewers, because, of course, it's not just about your own case, but it's also about the circumstances that face many in policing in England and Wales, where the IOPC takes an interest for whatever reason. The investigations do often seem to take quite some considerable time, and sometimes, certainly to somebody looking in from outside, such as myself, uh, the rationale behind the length of the investigation is somewhat questionable. Why is it taking so long? Would be the sort of short summary. But so your own particular circumstances, the allegations were made, the IOPC stepped in, you retired um, from the force so as to allow the force to make progress whilst your own investigation was being undertaken by the IOPC. And 16 months later, you find yourself fully vindicated, fully cleared. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair summary. Looking around a number of my colleagues across the UK, really sadly, this doesn't appear to be a unique set of circumstances. The amount of chief constables that are subject to disciplinary action, I'm finding, Bernard, just frankly eye-watering, and that's before you start to look at kind of assistant and deputy chief constables. I think what's absolutely paramount, and reflecting back, and one of the things I'm really, really proud of, but I talked about the transformation of Humberside, but as the Deputy Chief Constable and then subsequently as the Chief Constable, key to that transformation was to really focus on challenging a lot of poor practice, and in particular poor cultures with individuals, and a very few number of individuals. Sometimes that challenge and doing things a different way, not everybody likes, but that is the job of a leader, and that is the job of a chief, is to steer a force somewhere. Now, kind of this wasn't received well, kind of, in all quarters. I fully accept that, but it led to complaints against myself, complaints against my wider team, and I am aware there was subsequently kind of complaints against the Police and Crime Commissioner himself by a very small number of individuals with motivations very personal and sometimes very political. Probably, the worst thing for myself personally was looking back was the use of the press by individuals and serving individuals to suit their own agendas. And when something is leaked into the press, when something is out there, it takes on a whole new life of its own. But I was subject to press leaks in kind of June and July of 2024, and then further ones in November of 2024. And frankly, just to spread falsities and untruths to forward your own agenda is just kind of, it's frankly unacceptable. You touched also on, for instance, the amount of time it took for such an investigation. The IOPC, in their initial letters to me, were talking about 6 to 9 months, and 16 months later, here we are. And, in effect, your life is on hold for that entire period.
So let's stick for the time being with your own specific case, and then we'll broaden the conversation into the wider investigations that have been going on against chief constables and others at the most senior ranks, and on to others across policing. But in your own particular circumstances, can you understand why the IOPC has taken some 16 months to come to their determination, fully clearing you?
I mean, do I understand it and do I accept it? I think kind of that they're probably, understand and accept will be the two individual words. I do not agree with the amount of time it has taken, but I do have an understanding. You don't go through 34 years of knowledge of the system without getting an idea. Fundamentally, it comes down to, in terms of the IOPC, their capacity and their capability to undertake such investigations. But I talked about, as a chief constable, challenging poor cultures and challenging individuals with poor cultures. But likely there also has to be a recognition. It's quite a unique position kind of you hold in these circumstances, and people are going to want to take a swipe, to be quite frank. And there is a real lack of understanding or a public acknowledgement around that, about the very vulnerable position you find yourself in.
So, again, sticking with your own particular circumstances, what would it have taken, do you think, for the IOPC to have concluded the investigation in a much more timely, much more prompt fashion?
I mean, in relation to my specific set of circumstances, I mean, there was primarily one single investigator allocated. Now, I have no doubt that kind of, there would have been other people kind of in the background giving some support, but that investigator also has other jobs and other investigations to undertake. So in terms of the physical capability of an individual to coordinate something of that magnitude, from when they don't belong to a force, they have to make contact with people, have to speak to people, interview, the legal process that goes around this, and then linking in, for instance, with representative teams such as Composer, and those are the people making the complaints. I do understand can be very complex, but that lack of capacity within the IOPC, and also that lack of recognition about what I regard as quite unique circumstances chief officers find themselves in, is leaving them, frankly, quite hampered.
So, your professional opinion would be that it's a resourcing challenge that has led to your investigation taking quite so long to conclude. Would that be your belief on some of the other investigations that the IOPC have undertaken in the past and perhaps are currently undertaking against your former fellow chief constables? It does seem, again, from where I sit, that there are quite a significant number of chief constables that have attracted the IOPC's attention for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's not chief constables; it's the full cadre of chief officers, and I'm in contact with a number of people that are going through these investigations. Now, really sadly, the length of time to conduct and conclude these investigations, with people either suspended, seconded, or on other forms of restrictions, now seems to be 1 to 2 years in standard. And that practice alone, with that time, is hampering a leader's ability to be able to, well, in essence, to be able to lead a force and to be able to change. And I look really quite interestingly, kind of in the press recently about requirements for changes in leadership and new drives around police leadership. But one of the key things that needs to be happen is leaders need to be afforded the ability to lead, to make those challenges, and to be given some safeguarding around their position when they do so.
There has indeed been an announcement just on this day, the day of this recording, from the College of Policing that we will come on to very shortly. Um, so the IOPC investigations into the activities of the most senior ranks you've commented on there. Is there a similar resourcing challenge for the IOPC, not just in the most senior officers, but then across the board throughout all ranks and all those working in policing when the IOPC gets involved?
I mean, my specific views, if I were to boil it down to a number of key points, I would say this. Firstly, I do believe, or there is a significant resourcing and capacity issue in terms of the IOPC. What we are seeing is, for chief officers, in effect, a weaponisation of the complaints and investigation system for individual gain, personal motivation, and very sadly at times for political gain. And that can be seen, that's spreading out from a number of chief officers. We're seeing widespread misuse of the police conduct system. We're seeing widespread use within those investigations of leaks to the press, which hardly affords a fair and transparent process. And in terms of your basic human rights, it certainly kind of makes it very uncomfortable in terms of having a private and family life, but secondly, a right to a fair trial and not a trial by media. For those chief officers having to go back to those positions when things have played out very, very publicly leaves them in a very, very difficult position going forwards.
And I imagine also disruptive for the force in going through that process. Sometimes for good reason, but not always. And
Could
also
I just pass it?
in terms of cost, in terms of the need to find and appoint an acting chief constable or similar, and the administrative costs of putting that in. It
I
seems
mean,
odd that if it's a question simply of the IOPC assigning two investigators, let's say to your specific case, in which case you would imagine that two investigators, instead of taking 16 months as did one investigator, two investigators are going to do it in, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 months instead. So an immediate benefit of increasing the resources to the IOPC.
it does, but there's probably a number of things that need to change. I mean, just now you touched on a really interesting point. Right at the beginning of the interview, I mean, I touched on 34 years service, but I touched on that time at Humberside, which saw the transformation of the force. And the point that I, really tried to make, and if I haven't come across, I do apologise, but it's not the chief that makes the difference every day. It's the people that go out, it's the men and women that go out and they walk the streets and they do a really difficult job, and that we're dealing with ordinary people doing a really extraordinary job. The net effect has been on the force has been, is devastating. It has to go through a process of appointing temporary chiefs and then a full-time chief after. You see a change in direction and chief officer team. That's very disruptive to the force. And I have no doubt in the next HMIC inspection, it will suffer as a result of that.
We've just had today the announcement by the UK's College of Policing of the launch of a new police leadership commission. Now, that's to be chaired, the college tells us, by former Home Secretary Lord Blunkett and former Policing Minister Lord Herbert of South Downs. It will assess current leadership capabilities and identify the gaps and challenges facing the service now and in the future. Now, this isn't just about leadership from chiefs, but it's leadership more broadly through all ranks and all levels within policing. That announcement does focus, it appears, on um, uh, recruitment. It says less about retention, at least the initial announcement does. Is there much, excuse me, is there much of a link between the announcement of that review and what it is that we're now talking about?
I think they're inextricably linked. I really do. I mean, I would say there is a tremendous link. I read the announcement today and looked at the press releases in relation to that review and the review of police leadership. One of the real interesting elements that I found, which talked very specifically about fast tracking the right people and talent into the positions. However, one of the key debates that there's been over the past decade and is still current is also about the lack of experience within police leadership. So here you already, and within this position itself, you have a rub about trying to fast track talent in, which has always been, I would suggest, for the College of Policing, a slightly uncomfortable place. I don't think the policing has ever got that right. But then but weighing that off against the lack of experience, and experience is a really important ingredient when you're dealing with a very politicised environment at the moment. Now, we've spoken about a number of chiefs, a significant number subject to investigation, and an even larger number of chief officers. And while I accept there are examples and recent examples of poor conduct coming out, which are frankly really damaging to the whole context of policing leadership, to see a complaint system weaponised is puts us in a really, really difficult place, because what needs to change, one of the key elements, and this is where I'm coming to, leaders, when they're enacting change, when they're challenging few individuals with poor cultures, need to be supported. And also that really unique position of leading that challenge, setting a new direction and doing something different has to be supported, and not allow a few individuals for nefarious means to actually bring down individuals and forces for personal and political gain.
Well, I hope what we'll be able to do at some point in the near future is record something further for Policing TV, focusing more on some of the successes that you enjoyed, both as Chief Constable of Humberside and indeed in your 30-year career prior to the 4 years in Humberside. We focused today on primarily the circumstances that have led you to have been exonerated by the IOPC, for which many congratulations. We've also broadened that to look at wider related matters. I'm going to pause in a second just to give you the opportunity for any closing remarks you might wish to make. But can I thank you for your time here on Policing TV and wish you every success in whatever it is that you will now choose to focus on. But Paul, your closing remarks.
I mean, thank you very much. If I was going to finalise with two or three crisp, clear considerations, what I regard needs to change in terms of the police investigative system, but in particular investigations against chief officers. Firstly, I do believe there needs to be a change in mindset to support leaders and a recognition of the unique circumstances chief officers find themselves in to allowing them to lead. Capability and capacity within the IOPC to conduct the investigations at a far faster rate is absolutely essential, because taking chief officers out for 1 to 2 years is frankly not acceptable. And then the next element is clear guidance, I would suggest, by the IOPC when dealing with witnesses and people making those complaints about their legal and professional responsibilities around use of press, leaking information and data sharing, because the IOPC also have a moral responsibility to ensure professional standards are maintained on both sides of that fence.
Paul Anderson, former Chief Constable of Humberside Police, thank you very much indeed for your time here on Policing TV.
My pleasure.